Welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of the Thursday Show. I am your host, Paul Miles. This week, we'll be discussing the beginning of the creation week, days 1 and 2, which is found in Genesis 1, 1 through 8. I'll also be teaching you a quick and easy way to effectively remember the order of events in the creation week. And then in the question and answers section, we will be discussing a question relating to the preservation of creation history, and we will look at some ancient pagan myths regarding their different views of creation. The creation week. We call it a week because we believe it was 7 days, literally. Actually, the creation itself took place over 6 days, and then the 7th day was a resting, a stopping of creation. How do we remember this? Well, funny we should ask. A few weeks ago, I taught this topic in Hungary with a wonderful group of Bible students out there from all over the world. And I devised a little system, a little memory jogger for remembering the order of creation days. And I taught this to my students, and we reviewed it a couple times. And by the time that the final exam came around, they were, for the most part, able to remember the events of the creation week. I think I had like one student that confused 2 of the days. Not a huge deal. So it seems that this works. For this memory trick, though, you will need 7 fingers. So there are 7 days. How do we remember them? So let's talk about day 1. Hold up one finger and use your finger as if you are switching a light switch. Of course, in America, we flick switches like this. In Eastern Europe, we push them like that. So whichever finger motion you use to turn on a light, use that one. Why? Because on day 1, God created light. Now, he didn't flick a switch. There wasn't a light switch for him to switch. He simply spoke it into existence ex nihilo. As we'll see, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and it describes the creation of light. I take this to mean that not only did God create light, but he also created matter. We'll discuss that in a little bit. So on day 1, God created matter and light. So day 1, turn on your light switch. Day 2, God creates a division. So hold your fingers together and put an expanse between them. Day 2, right? God divided waters below from the waters above, created the sky, the expanse. We'll talk about that today. Day 2, division. Day 3 also involves a division, right? On day 3, God separated the waters from the land and brought out plant life. So get your 3 fingers and divide them like so. These will be our water fingers moving away, and then this middle one will be the land emerging from the top. And then the plants come up. So make 3 little trees come up. There we go. So day 3, we get the division of the waters for the dry land to come out and the plants. Day 4. Day 4 is the day that we get these celestial bodies, right? The sun, the moon, and the stars. So twinkle, twinkle, your 4 little fingers all around. Those are going to be the celestial bodies. Day 5. Day 5, we get the fish in the sea. So make your fishy. And the birds of the air. Make a bird flying around. Okay? Day 5, fish and birds. Day 6. Day 6 is when we get the land animals, right? So we'll start with 4 fingers, and we'll have them creeping, crawling around on land like so, little cows. What about the other 2? Well, the other 2, we're going to have Adam standing there amongst the animals, large and in charge. And from Adam, use your thumb and pull the thumb out. That'll be his rib that we pull out and make Eve, right? So, day 6, land animals to include Adam and Eve, right? How do we know that Adam and Eve were created on day 6? Well, we know from Genesis 1 that Adam was created on day 6 that man was created. And then at the end of the day, God says it is good. Well, if we look at Genesis 2, it describes the creation of woman in more detail. And we have man on earth without woman, and God said it's not good. So he created woman. So since it was good at the end of day 6, we know that that woman was there with man. Day 7. So day 7 is God doing the Sabbath, resting, ceasing to work. So make this like a couch with God laying down on it to rest. And then for the 5, it can be a bucket of chicken that he's eating. Now, God did not actually eat a bucket of chicken on day 7. This is me making God in my own image because I like to rest and eat chicken. We know that God did not eat chicken on day 7 because there were only 2 chickens, the 2 proto-chickens, the male and the female of the chicken kind, the ancestors of all chickens that we have today, all pheasants, all of that bunch. Being as how we still have chickens today, we know God did not eat them, or else we wouldn't have them anymore. But little creative license. So day 7 is God resting. Okay, so day 1, God creates light. Along with that is all of matter. Day 2 is an expanse. Day 3, he separates the land from the water and creates the plants. Day 4 is the celestial bodies up in the sky. Day 5 is the fish of the sea and the birds of the air. Day 6 is the land, animals, man, Adam, and Eve. And day 7 is God resting. Okay? Pretty easy. If you'll repeat that to yourself a couple of times, it'll be easy to remember. There you have it. The creation week in the order that it occurred. All right. So let's move into the biblical text. We'll take a look at the first 2 days of creation today. I'll read Genesis 1 through 8 aloud from the MEV, the Modern English Version. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the water. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So evening and morning were the first day. Verse 6. Then God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, and let it separate the waters from the water." So God made the expanse and separated the waters which were under the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so. God called the expanse heaven. So the evening and the morning were the second day. All right, so day 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The Hebrew is Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'eretz. In the beginning, Bereshit. God created. In Hebrew, it's created God. They have this particular way in Hebrew of putting the verb before the subject. So Bereshit bara. Bereshit is created, is in the beginning. Bara is he created, singular. Elohim is the name for God. Bereshit bara Elohim. In the beginning, God created. Now, we get into an interesting grammatical nuance here within the first 3 words of the Hebrew Bible. First of all is in the beginning, right? This is the beginning of the system, right? Prior to this, God is the only thing that existed. And then we have God, Elohim. Now in Hebrew, whenever you see the suffix im or ot, im is the plural ending for masculine nouns in Hebrew, typically, plenty of exceptions. And ot is the feminine ending, the feminine plural ending for feminine nouns in Hebrew, with plenty of exceptions. What are some examples? Okay, so you've probably seen the angels, the seraphim. It's from seraph, seraphim. It's a type of angel. You might hear of the cherub, which there's not really a ch in Hebrew. If you ever see ch, it is probably originally pronounced like h. So cherubim. That's another type of angel. As far as the feminine, you might know matzah. Is that the cracker that we have on Sabbath and whatnot? Passover. Matzot is the plural. Mitzvah, command, right? Mitzvot is the plural. Okay, so Elohim. Elohim is the grammatical plural for God. It is either translated as God, singular, capital G, because it is in reference to the one true God, Jehovah, or there are occasions where it is speaking of multiple false gods, in which case it's gods with a little g. In this case, we know that it is the big G, the one true God, because he is the one who created everything. Isn't it interesting, though, that we have the name of this title of God in the plural in Hebrew, yet bara, he created, is a singular verb, right? So we already see in this first sentence in the Hebrew Bible in Genesis, we could argue that the book of Job was actually written before Genesis. That's neither here nor there. But in this very beginning opening statement of the Torah, we already have this idea of plurality in unity from eternity past. Bereshit bara Elohim. What did he create? Et hashamayim va'et haaretz, the heavens and the earth. Another fun one, eretz. Eretz in Hebrew means earth, and it's sort of there's an argument to be made that it's actually where we get our word earth, E-A-R-T-H, as compared to the et. So we sort of lisp th instead of t. Okay, that's neither here nor there too. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Then it goes on. The earth was formless and void. Formless means it was kind of like a big old bubbly blob out there floating in the middle of the universe. We see in the end of the verse that the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. So in the beginning, the earth was a formless, watery blob. By the time we get to day 3, we're going to have the separation of the waters pulling it away from the land. It will become formed, right? But in the beginning, it was formless. This is before day 2. So all of the matter that has existed was in this giant formless blob floating around in the middle of the universe. Kind of a scary thing to think about. It was formless and it was void. By void, we mean that it was empty, did not have anyone living in it. So we have all of the matter in the universe. It is formless and void. And in the next 5 days, we're going to resolve those two problems, the formless and the void. God is going to form the earth and the cosmos, and he is going to fill it. So, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. The deep is what Moses is calling this formless, void matter. And it was dark. That's another problem that God will resolve on this day, day 1, right? And the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Okay, we've already discussed the waters. What is this, though? We already have a reference to the Spirit of God. Okay, interesting. The doctrine of the triune God is already becoming evident, right? We already have God the Holy Spirit. We have a plurality and unity in God created. People like to accuse this Trinitarian doctrine of being a Christian thing. It's out of the New Testament. Worse, people will accuse the Trinity of not even being a New Testament doctrine, but they will say that it was invented by the Eastern Orthodox Church or by some other entity. No. This is not true. It is a biblical doctrine. It is very readily evident in the New Testament, that's for sure, because the New Testament agrees with the Old. But we can already see Trinitarian theology coming out here in the creation. We know that all three members of the Triune Godhead were involved in this. And we don't need John 1:1 to see that, though John 1:1 certainly clarifies that for us. Okay, we're still in day one. Genesis 1:3. Right? So we have darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God is hovering there in the darkness over the surface of the water. We don't have to worry about the Spirit of God bumping into the water. He knows where it is even without light, because he created it. He's omniscient. He can do that. So verse 3, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So this is creation ex nihilo, creating from nothing, right? God did not use something else in order to create the blubble. He merely spoke it into existence. Then he speaks light into existence. Now, we know that light is waves. So for there to be waves, there must be matter. So interesting that God created matter first, and then he created light. So it's possible that at this point, God is animating molecules in this primordial matter mass and sending them out as light. We do not have yet a light source that is mentioned. So there are a couple of theories that have developed around this. How is it that we have light but no sun, right? Well, first of all, the sun is not the only source of light that there is, right? So it could be that God was animating molecules out of the blob and sending them out. Could be that God created a local light source from whence the light radiated. That could be another way. Another issue is, did God only create light, or did he create all of the laws of physics at this time? It seems that the laws that govern light also govern other aspects of the physical rules of the universe. So I would tend to look at day one and say this is God creating matter and the laws that govern matter, right? To include the laws that govern light and the way that that works. Verse 4, God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. Okay. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. This reference to the evening and morning is it lends credibility to the possibility of a local light source. The earth had not yet been formed, but I think it is reasonable to say that we still have a 24-hour period here. One of the reasons would be this reference here in verse 5. There was evening and morning, day one. Now, some will argue and say that this word day, the Hebrew word is yom, it can be used for long periods of time that are more extensive than 24 hours. For example, we'll frequently speak throughout the Bible of the day of the Lord, which is in reference to the coming 7-year tribulation and or to include the Messianic kingdom, which we know from the book of Revelation will last 1,000 years. That's more than 24 hours. Indeed, the first reference of day that nobody questions whether or not it is 24 hours in the Bible, in Genesis here, is a reference to the creation week, the day in which God, the Lord, created the heavens and earth, right? So why would we say that this day is particularly a 24 hours day? Why would we expect this to be a plain day rather than a more figurative extended period of time? Well, one reason is this reference to day one, Yom Echad, right? This form occurs in Hebrew only in reference to 24-hour days. This is one reference that we can, one reason we can say that. Another reason is because of the evening and the morning routine. Now, it's interesting. If we look at the text, it says evening and morning, not morning and then evening, or morning, afternoon, and evening. This is the basis for the Jewish day, which begins at sundown. And that's the point where it begins and ends, as opposed to the modern system that we typically have around the world, where it begins and ends at midnight. Either way of measuring time is perfectly fine, but the Jews start and end their day at the evening rather than midnight. And it's because of this right here. So it sort of sets the standard for what day is for the days to come. Okay, so that's good. We know it was good because God said it was. So, verse number 6, day 2. Then God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." Okay. So, what matter do we have so far? Well, we have this big, formless, watery substance. Now, by water, does it mean that it was pure H2O? Perhaps. It could just be a bunch of hydrogen and oxygen molecules brought together, atoms brought together into water molecules into a big old blob. However, it's within the range of meaning for water to include mud, for example, right? We would say that a river is water, even though the water includes perhaps other substances, mud, dirt, right? Perhaps it's got a little saline in it, right? The sea is water, even though it's got salt. So it could be that the waters included more than hydrogen and oxygen. It could be that it was only pure water, and then God formed the other elements out of that. It's possible. Whatever the case, we have this deep, watery substance. It's huge. It includes all of the mass that we have today. And then God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of it." So he's taking this big blob and expanding it, flinging matter way out there, way up, way down, to the side, this way, that way, every other which way. Okay. So now we still have a little blob in the middle, and now we got a bunch of matter scattered all over the place. As we move along, God is going to form these things. He's going to form the earth, pulling the water out and then creating life on it and having dry land. And he's going to form the matter that's way out there into the celestial bodies. We're not there yet, though. We're only on day 2. First, God takes the matter and he flings it out everywhere. Now, we have this word, which the MEV, Modern English Version, has properly translated as expanse. The word in the Hebrew is rakia. If you read the King James Version, the New King James Version, a lot of versions prior to the King James, a lot of other versions, instead of saying expanse, it will say firmament. And this is where the flat earthers go bonkers. They would say, well, we would say that there's an expanse, right, between Earth and the stars. That's just a big expanse, right? Bunch of emptiness. It can be full of air in some places, right? There's an expanse between here and the ozone layer. There's an expanse where the birds fly. The birds fly in air, so that's an expanse. The flat earthers say, no. The word is firmament. It means a firm thing. You see there, the sky is actually a firm dome. So God took this big watery substance and put a firm dome in the place. If you were to send a rocket up, it would hit the firmament and explode. There is no space travel, blah, 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 blah. And the people who believe the earth is flat will support this with an abundance of conspiracy theories that are absolutely irrational. as well as really, really poorly done science experiments. Now, I mention this, and whenever I do, a lot of people laugh. However, I have some loved ones who have gone off the deep end and became these flat earth conspiracy theorists, and it is a difficult thing to watch, seeing a friend go through this. It's cultic. When we look at what happens in cults, a cult has a particular way of taking someone and having him isolate himself from his family, from his loved ones, from his friends, from his church. I've talked with pastors all over the place who have had people in their congregations become flat earthers. This was a very popular thing back in 2015. And the story is often the same, right? The person becomes a flat earth conspiracy theorist. Then he tries to recruit as many people around him in the church as possible. He ends up often insulting the pastor, saying he's a big idiot for not seeing that the earth is flat. And then he separates himself from the church as being one who is enlightened and in the know, while the rest of us are being foolish. There's a very serious problem with pride there, I think, and pride is a sin. I think that this particular sin is characteristic of the flat earth community, and it's a destructive sin, and it ruins relationships. It really does. It's a very, very sad thing. So I don't laugh about the flat earthers. I've seen it do too much damage to people. However, there is another view of flat earth that needs to be discussed, and it is often situated in pride as well. Now, this is the view that the earth is a round and spinning ball, as it is. However, they will say that the biblical authors thought the earth was flat, and they were describing a flat earth and a firm dome in the sky right here. This is an assault on the biblical text. It's saying, oh, those silly biblical authors, they did not know that the earth was round. I do, however, we have better knowledge than the biblical authors do. So the Bible's wrong, we're right. We need to change the way that we read the Bible. And if you start reading Genesis like that, it's going to be really hard to get your theology back on the rails. So two types of flat earthers are the conspiracy theorists and the liberals. So both are to be very much avoided. Now, it happens that the biggest thing in flat earth theology is the firmament, right here. The correct translation is expanse. If we understand the firmament as an expanse rather than a firm thing, so much of this will clear right up. Now, this isn't just me making it up. There are plenty of linguists who will agree. We have plenty of cognates. For example, rack, right? The word is rakia, and expanse. Rack means empty. So whenever Joseph's brothers threw him into a hole, it was a rack hole, an empty hole, right? Because rack has this idea of emptiness. Now I can go on and on and on about this, or you can watch me go on and on about it in another place. I've already talked about this at the ISBH webinar that we had on topics in cosmology. I discussed the history of the translation of rakia. The folks who changed it from expanse to firmament, I think, were doing the same thing that theistic evolutionists do today. They're trying to make the what the bad science around them said fit into the Bible. It's bad science to say that the sky is firm. However, there were a lot of pagans who not only said the sky was firm, but they were actually worshiping the sky. And the Septuagint translators, translating the Hebrew Bible into Greek, wanted to be attractive to the pagans, I think. So they changed the word from expanse to stereoma in Greek, which means like a firm thing. And a lot of negative repercussions have come out of that. So I'll go ahead and drop a link to my ISBH presentation on rakia. If anyone is interested in exploring that topic further, you can look there or reach out to me however you'd like. So, day 2, God creates this expanse, right? Dividing the waters from the waters. So, Genesis 1:6, then God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. Okay, so that's our idea. God is spreading out the matter. So God made the expanse and separated the waters which were under the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so. Then God called the expanse heaven. All right, so that's another interesting word, heaven. When we talk about heaven, we often speak of the place where we go when we die. Okay, that is indeed referred to as heaven. Another use of the word heaven is in reference to the sky, right? Even the secularist will occasionally call the sky the heavens, right? Or beyond the sky, into the great expanse of the cosmos where all the stars are, right? The heavens. Right? So God called this big expanse heaven. I think he was referring not to the spiritual residence where we will take up after we die, assuming we have ever believed in Christ for eternal life. But I think it was describing the physical heavens. Okay. So the evening and the morning were the second day. So evening, morning, right? Start of a new day, day 2. Alrighty. So there we have it. Day 1, God creates the light, the matter, the light. Day 2, the expanse. From here, we will go on to see how God forms everything. All right, now let's get to our questions. Maureen in Elbasan, Albania asks, is it a valid possibility to say that the history of creation, Genesis, etc., was already passed on from generation to generation? It's not unlikely that the godly line of the offsprings passed on orally the truths. I don't think that what Moses wrote was something new and that only he knew about it. My response to Martin would be absolutely yes. I believe that ancient man had a very good understanding of creation. Let's back up a few steps here and do a quick overview of the events that occur through human history up to the record of Genesis. So as we're working through now in the Thursday show, we have the creation week, 7 days. Then we have the fall of man in the Garden of Eden. And from there, man leaves the Garden of Eden and goes on to populate the world. And man becomes increasingly corrupt and evil. So God destroys everything and everyone in the flood except for Noah and his family. They are preserved on the ark. And then they get out of the ark and they spread out. No, they don't spread out. They stay put. Mankind decides to stay put but to build the Tower of Babel. So God confuses languages and then disperses everyone from there through linguistic confusion, which, being an Albanian, I understand you probably are familiar with. Albanian, I understand it is this beautiful language in the Balkans that doesn't look very much like the Slavic Balkan languages around it. Okay, so assuming that the Bible is true, assuming that what it says about these events is true, what would we expect? Well, we would expect that during the time before the flood, there was still a very good record and memory of the creation week, right? So God created Adam, put him in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve were able to walk around with God right there in the cool of the day, having a good old time. I would venture to guess that God probably told them about the creation, right? I mean, what would that be like, being Adam, the first just created man, right? You just kind of God forms you out of dirt and boom, you become aware. Okay, well, this is neat. What is this, right? You got paradise all around you and you have nothing to compare it to, right? You don't have any kind of fallen world to compare it to. And you get to walk around with God. Now, the fact that he's walking with God, by the way, is another Trinitarian thing. I believe this to be the second person of the Trinity, God the Son. I will have to get into that later, though. So I imagine that God told Adam about the creation, and he certainly told him about what would happen if he ate, right? And then whenever they do fall, he receives the curse and he gets sent out. So Adam probably had a really good understanding of these things. Well, there are people who eventually died in the flood who would have been old enough to have known Adam, right? Adam lived a long time. They lived a long time. So the memory, is national memory the right word at this point? It's all of mankind having access to Adam for so long. The understanding of creation would have been well preserved in this time, all the way up to Noah, who was righteous and was preserved. Now, surely there were people who were corrupting the truth prior to the flood, but by the time we get to the flood, all of that is washed away, and Noah and his sons are the only ones that walk out. And we presume that they were righteous and had an understanding of the creation account as well as the flood that they just witnessed, so they would have been able to carry it on. Now, by the time we get to the Tower of Babel, Noah and his sons would still be alive. They would still be able to communicate with their sons, grandsons, and great-grandsons. And then from the Tower of Babel, we get the great global dispersion. Okay. So Shem still would have been around. I did the math recently, and it seems like Shem would have been alive long enough to have met not only Abraham. There's actually a theory that Melchizedek, whom Abraham meets, is Shem himself. But Shem would have gone on to live long enough to have met Isaac and perhaps even Jacob. I think I did the math, and I think Shem would have been old enough to change Jacob's diapers. According to the Masoretic text, there are some textual variants here that we could consider. So we still have access to Shem, who lived prior to the flood and who could have talked to people who knew Adam all the way through until Abraham and later, right? Now, of course, Abraham has interactions with Pharaoh in Egypt. So while Egypt was being formed, there was still access to firsthand people who were there prior to the flood, right? So it's possible that the ancient Egyptians had access to Ham, the son of Noah, right? It's possible that the ancient Greeks, like the very first ones, could have had access to Japheth, right? So I think it's very reasonable to assume that the actual truth, the biblical, which was written down in the Bible, was known prior to Moses writing it down. Supposing that the Bible is right, though, would it also stand to reason that people would have intentionally corrupted what the Bible says about creation? Oh, you betcha, right? Satan is on a non-stop assault against the Bible and against the truth. So if the Bible is true, we would anticipate that the pagans would have altered the truth into a lie in a way that still resembles the truth a little bit. So that's what we would expect. Is that what we see? You betcha. So I've compiled a couple of quotes from a couple of ancient pagan myths. We just looked at days 1 and 2 in the biblical creation account, the one true creation account. Let's take a look at some ancient pagan myths and see if my theory would line up, right? Assuming that after the Tower of Babel, pagans left, they still had a national memory of the creation week. They probably would have corrupted it. Is that what it looks like? Okay. Let's take a look at an Egyptian text first. This is a coffin text, number 714. and it describes, from an Egyptian perspective, the formless and void. So it begins, this is the false god Nun speaking. Nun is the false god who is the primeval waters. He says, I am the waters, unique without second. That is where I developed, on the great occasion of my floating that happened to me. I am the one who had developed Circlet, who was in the egg. I am the one who began therein in the waters. Okay, so we have this idea of primordial water. What does the Bible say about day one? God created a big watery mass. All of the matter was there. Now, the Egyptians have gone sneaky on us. They are saying that the waters were God. Instead of seeing the creation as being something that the Creator made, they are turning to creation and making it the Creator. They're worshiping that as a false god. Oh, Satan did the Egyptians real dirty on that one. Then he goes on, see, the flood is subtracted from me. See, I am the remainder. It was through my effectiveness that I brought about my body. I'm the one who made me. And it was as I wished, according to my heart, that I built myself. Okay. So first of all, he's not pre-existent. He's creating himself here. But also notice that it says the flood is subtracted from me, right? The idea of an expanse, right? We have the waters, and then water is subtracted from him, which would be similar to God spreading it out. By the way, if you look at the depictions of Nun, you will often see him depicted as having a watery body because he's the primordial water, and you'll often see him lifting up a boat with the other gods on it because as he goes on, you get this idea of expansion from Nun. Okay, well, that's a false religion. That's very easily identified as lies, 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 lies. But it seems to be that these are lies, 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 lies that were started as the truth that was then corrupted into this lie. And we still see traces of the actual factual order of creation in this myth, which was turned into a lie. So that's Egypt. Let's take a look at the Babylonian creation epic myth. It's called Enuma Elish. Enuma Elish is Babylonians. The first line means when the heavens above did not exist. So tablet 1, several tablets. It's written in cuneiform. So it says, tablet 1, beginning, when the heavens above did not exist, and the earth beneath had not come into being. There was Apsu, the first in order, their begetter, and Demir's Tiamat, who gave birth to them all. They had mingled their waters together. Okay. So, before we have a formed earth and a formed heaven, we have what? Waters, right? Now here it is deified into two watery bodies and they mingle together. Enuma Elish is a particularly perverse creation account. There are some other perverse acts in the Egyptian accounts, which, by the way, are in contradiction with each other because they are not inerrant and they're not inspired. So they were written by men. So they have contradictions in between them. But here we see the creation being watery substance, which is true. There was originally water. The problem is that instead of this water being created, the water itself is a god. It's actually two gods. They mingle together. And there's often throughout the Babylonian creation myth, as well as others, there are motifs of creation through procreation. That is, gods having sex with each other to create other gods and matter and whatnot. And then in this Enuma Elish, we get into various wars, right? So the gods start fighting each other and breaking each other up. As we go along, we get to tablet 3, line 137. He, Marduk, Marduk's the worst, split her, Tiamat, into two like a dried fish. Okay, so Tiamat, we just saw, she's one of the primordial water gods. Marduk comes along and kills her and splits her in two. One half of her he sent up and stretched out as the heavens. He stretched the skin and appointed a watch with the instruction not to let her waters escape. He crossed over the waters, surveyed the celestial parts, and adjusted them to match Apsu, Nudimud's abode. Okay. So, in addition to the various sexual acts that we get different gods from, Marduk eventually comes out and he kills one of the water gods and turns it into the matter for the sky. Then we start getting into the deification of the sky and turning it into a firm dome, and that's where we start getting this absurd notion of a firm sky in the Babylonian myth. In the Egyptian myths, it is Nut who is the sky goddess, who is deified and considered an actual firm being that's rational. And I think that's sort of where the Septuagint translators step in and say, well, we're not going to make the sky god like the pagans did, but we will recognize that it's firm. And that's where we get the bad translation of firmament eventually from the Greek into the Latin, which has haunted us ever since. Okay. So what do we see in the Egyptian and the Babylonian myths? Well, we see a lot that's similar to the first 2 days, right? This idea of a primordial water. They falsify it by deifying the water instead of making it created by the one true God. And then through whatever acts, the water somehow gets separated into matter being way out there and having an expanse. Okay. Well, if you were to start with the Bible, the actual true account of what actually did happen, and then pervert it into a false religion, you'd probably end up with something like this. Now, it's at this point that people will often point and laugh and say, "Oh, ho, Paul, you silly dispensationalist, you believing the earth is young, thinking you can trust the Bible. Don't you see? These are ancient Near Eastern myths. These are the myths that the author of Genesis copied to form into your Hebrew Bible. He only rearranged it to make it a monotheistic religion, see? The Bible was written after Enuma Elish. Can't you see this, you silly, silly fool, you? No, that's not true. This is an accusation that starts with the notion that the Bible is wrong and then tries to push things to make it fit. Here's another way to look at it. Suppose we walk up to some trade tracks, and all you see are some train tracks going this way and that way. Okay. Judging by the train tracks, would you be able to tell which way the train just went? Did it go that way or did it go that way? Well, no, not by telling, just by looking at the train tracks, you can't tell. Now, there might be a hobo under the bridge who saw the train go. You can ask him. You might be able to look up the train schedule and figure out from there, right? But just by looking at the train tracks, you wouldn't be able to tell. So it is here, right? If all you had was the Bible and a bunch of creation myths, and you didn't know which one was right, it would be difficult to tell which one formed the basis for the others, right? However, being as how we can verify the Bible in several other places as well, we can verify the biblical account scientifically. We can very easily prove that Jesus is resurrected. And if Jesus is resurrected, then we should probably take seriously what he said because God resurrected him. And since God resurrected him, that gives us the affirmation that he approves of what Jesus said. Jesus claimed to be God. That's true. God approved that one. Jesus said that he spoke of Moses as if Moses was reliable because Jesus believed that Moses was reliable. So we can take that one as true too, right? He spoke out against the pagans, so we can say that the pagans were wrong, right? So that's one way we can look and say, yeah, of course the Bible's right. It's the word of God. Not everybody's going to accept that though, because typically if you reject Moses, you will reject Jesus in one way or the other. People try to reject Moses without rejecting Jesus. It often goes very poorly for them. But here's another line of reason we can go through. Okay, so you're saying that the Bible must have copied from the pagan myths because they were prominent in the ancient Near East, and the Bible came out of the ancient Near East. Okay. Well, let's take a look somewhere else then. Let's take a look at the Popol Vuh. What is the Popol Vuh? The Popol Vuh is a myth from the Quiche people, which is a Mayan people group. So Central America. The Popol Vuh was preserved in oral tradition for a long time. It wasn't until 1550 AD that it was first written down by a couple of missionaries. Funny enough. Okay. Now, was the Popol Vuh, is this something that the Bible copied? Of course not, right? We have manuscripts of Genesis that predate the first written account of the Popol Vuh, right? The Popol Vuh came to Maya and was completely void of ancient Near Eastern contact for millennia, right? We would not say that the Bible copied from the Popol Vuh, nor would we say that the Egyptians nor the Babylonians copied from the Popol Vuh. I think that we could say, though, that the Popol Vuh and the Mayans and the Egyptians all trace their ancestry back to the Tower of Babel, as do the Hebrews, right? And they all spread out, and they all corrupted the true account of our origins, except for the Hebrews, which preserved it in the Word of God that was inspired. Okay, that's my claim. What would it look like if it was true? Well, we would see similarities in the Popol Vuh to what we've seen in the other three sources, the myths of Egypt and Babylon, as well as the truth of the Bible. So let's take a look at the Popol Vuh. All right, so here is the state before creation. Popol Vuh says, these therefore are first words, first speech. Notice it has creation being done how? Through speech, right? Which is what the Bible said is the way that God created, by speaking. God said, let there be light. There was not yet anything that exists standing erect, merely spread out water, merely tranquil sea, merely alone it is spread out. There was not yet anything that might exist. So to the Mayans, the primordial state was waters being spread out. Okay, interesting. Then we have creation by moving water. It says, you are conceived. This water shall be taken away, shall be emptied out, shall be created. This earth, its plate, then be gathered itself, leveled therefore. Then it may be sown, then it may be dawn, sky, earth. Right? So even the Popol Vuh, a pagan myth, separated by millennia, separated by continents, separated by time and space, still has elements that would be presumably corruptions of the truth which was known prior to Babel. Okay, so do we turn to the pagan myths to find out how things were created? Of course not, right? These are lies, satanic lies. These are false religions. However, if the Bible is true, we would anticipate false religions, and we would anticipate false religions that look like the false religions that we have. This is only considering the first 2 days of creation. There are also other similarities throughout the pagan myths for the rest of the creation week. And this is not to mention the flood myths that are prevalent all over the world. Several of which actually include a rainbow motif. So, the events that we have in the Bible happened precisely as they are written in the Bible. They were preserved through Moses, who wrote them down, and he was inspired when he wrote them. It's possible that Moses had written documents that were passed along throughout time up to this. It's possible that oral tradition was carried along as well. The Popol Vuh was carried on orally throughout all this time. It wasn't written until 1550. And there are still some remnants of the truth, right? The idea that it was water before it was land. So it's also possible that the Hebrews carried this on orally. That's not very difficult to imagine, especially since we have a uh, pre-flood generation that's still walking the earth whenever Abraham and whenever the Hebrew nation was starting, right? So could have very easily been taught generation to generation to generation. Several generations would have lived at the same time, so you could have verified with your great great grandfather that you were getting it right. Okay, so yes, absolutely, the creation myth could have been the creation account, the actual true creation, not the myth, could have been preserved very well up to Moses. And then any misconceptions that could have crept in throughout the time from the creation to Moses's authorship would have been corrected. If there was indeed a misunderstanding prior to Moses writing it down, then when Moses put the ink to the parchment, right, under God's inspiration, God would have protected his text and made sure, hey, Moses, y'all were wrong about that one. This is how it really went down, right? If there was a mistake somewhere prior to Moses, it would have gotten fixed by Moses. And then, of course, the false myths spin out of control, which is unfortunate. But even the false myths sort of testify to the truth and the reliability of God's word. Thank you so much for submitting that question, Marine. This concludes episode 2 of season 2 of the Thursday show. I look forward to seeing y'all next week when we continue on in the creation week. Thank you much, and God bless.